Hey everybody, welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed, the television edition. I'm your host, Matt Connarton. By the way, I just want to tell everybody, in case anyone's wondering, and I haven't heard anyone ask about it, but I know how much you all cherish me and are concerned for my health and well-being. So as far as I know, as of 2 p.m. today, Eastern Time, I, Matthew Thomas Connarton, being of relatively but perhaps not entirely sound mind, am at least reasonably certain that I am not currently carrying the Ebola virus. So I just wanted to put that out there for everyone in case anyone was wondering. As far as I know, as far as I'm aware, I haven't seen a medical professional. I haven't had any symptoms, but a friend of mine, Nicole, sent me a very nice text the other night and commented that she couldn't imagine what her life would be like if I were not in it. And I responded to her, of course. I was very honored by that. That was very, very sweet of her to say. And I said, well, actually your life would be probably pretty much the same, just a lot less awesome. So I try to be humble. I mean, aside from it being a lot less awesome, I'm sure it would be the same, as it would for all of you. If you didn't have this show in your life would be pretty much the same, just a lot less awesome. So anyway, so welcome to the show. Before we get rolling, I want to mention a programming note. This week on the other show that I do here, Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades, I'm the co-host of the Honorable Gary S. Hopper on that program. And our guest tonight is going to be George Lambert. George was on this show several weeks ago along with his wife Rhonda and his daughter Stephanie. And that, by the way, remains to this day, at least online, the most viewed episode so far of Matt Connarton Unleashed. But George is going to be coming on Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades tonight to talk about his run for the New Hampshire State Senate. Now, I know we have people online watching from other parts of the country because on this show we focus on national politics, not really state and local politics, though we do get into that occasionally. But here's the thing. Even if you're not interested in New Hampshire politics and you're like me and you tend to focus more on the national scene, I definitely would recommend checking out tonight's Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades, even though George is running for the state Senate here in New Hampshire. And here's why. I don't know if it was the last time that George was on. George has been on Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades a few times. That's how he and I met and became friends. And George is always a really interesting guest. But my favorite moment thus far on that program, and we've been doing that show for 4 years now. Gary and I were talking about it last week. It's like 4 years, gone in the blink of an eye. We started in 2011, summer of 2011. That's 4 years, right? Well, no, actually it's 3 years. I'm not good at math. Anyway, 3 years gone in the blink of an eye. So, that might be why when I said to him, no, it's been 4 years, he was like, really? No, it's only been 3. Okay. But we had George on, George and his wife Rhonda, and this was right after the 2012 elections. And it was a really interesting conversation because as regular viewers of this show know, one of the things I'm fascinated by is this ongoing sort of ideological struggle. Some call it a civil war. People who get a little carried away with the hyperbole, in my view, like to use that term, that's been going on in the Republican Party. Or you hear that, I always hate when people say this, that it's a battle for the soul of the party. I always find that, it doesn't stop me from repeating it, but I always find that a little pretentious. But anyway, you have these different factions in the Republican Party. Well, George had been on, it was right after the 2012 elections, and George had been on Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. And the last 20 to 25 minutes of the show, I don't think I said a word. I think I just sat back and listened because it was such a fascinating conversation. Because here you had Gary, and Gary is kind of what you might consider a mainstream establishment conservative, traditional conservative, whatever you want to call him. And George kind of represents more the libertarian wing of the Republican Party, which in New Hampshire is very strong. And the libertarian wing asserts itself nationally as well. It does have some things in common with the Tea Party wing. It also has some things very much not in common with the Tea Partiers. But but there is a very strong libertarian movement within the Republican Party. Um, and like I said, that last 20 or so minutes of the conversation when George had been on that episode of Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades, it was, so you've got the conservative, the establishment conservative Gary, and sort of the libertarian George having a very interesting conversation about the future of the Republican Party. And, Gary kind of digging in and saying, well, if we abandon our principles, our conservative principles, then what's even the point of this? What's even the point of being a Republican? And George, of course, is saying, well, this is the direction we need to go, and this is what I believe in. And so they disagreed. And it actually, they're friends, and it was friendly and amicable, but there were a couple of moments where there seemed to be some legitimate tension there between the two of them, as they both felt very passionately about this. The point being, I'm really looking forward to tonight because I'm hoping it's kind of more of the same, where we get to explore sort of that tension within the Republican Party that exists, and this is something we're seeing nationally, and I think we're going to see a lot more of it. We've seen a lot of it with the establishment conservatives versus the Tea Partiers, but we're also going to see more of the libertarian wing, I think, begin to assert itself, as Rand Paul, who clearly represents that wing of the party, also asserts himself as he gears up to challenge for the Republican nomination. So that aspect of the conversation about what's going on in the party, I think, is going to intensify nationally. And I'm hoping that tonight we get to see with George and Gary discussing this, and it'll probably be, I know it's hard to imagine me just sitting back and not saying anything, but if it does go in that direction where they're sort of debating that back and forth, it's just fascinating to just kind of listen. It reminded me, the first time I witnessed that, it reminded me of when I was a kid. And maybe this is part of why I got interested in politics at such a frighteningly young age. I remember when I was a kid sitting at the kitchen table listening to my dad, who at that time was a Democrat. Now he considers himself kind of a liberal to moderate Republican. But when I was a kid, my dad was very much a Democrat, and his best friend Dan was a Republican. And hearing them kind of debate back and forth the issues and whatnot, it was always fascinating to me. I was just a kid. I didn't have anything to contribute to the conversation anyway, but I would just sit there and listen. And to me, it was spellbinding just to listen to them talk and debate the issues. And it reminded me very much of that, sitting here listening to Gary and George kind of discuss this stuff. Obviously, the context is different. They're talking about specifically, they're both Republicans. They're not opposing parties, but they are in some ways very different ideologically. So anyway, I'm really looking forward to that. So like I said, even if you're only interested in national politics, please check out this week's Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades, because I really think that what you're going to see is a microcosm of what is happening nationally within the Republican Party. So I think that's going to be very, very interesting. I don't imagine we'll be discussing, or that it will even come up, what George and his family came on this program to discuss a few weeks ago, because as far as I can tell, that's already blown over. It's old news. Nobody cares. It seemed to blow over really quickly, thank God, because I do stand with George and his family on that issue. And I typically vote independent, but George is the kind of Republican that I like both George and Gary. I love Gary, and I consider him a friend. I consider them both friends, but George is he and I agree on enough issues where I'd feel comfortable voting for him, I think. So what I want to get into this week is I want to talk some political scandal. Now, I know that the big story right now nationally is what's going on in Ferguson, Missouri. I'm not going to get into that today. Maybe we'll tackle it at the end of the show if we have any time left over. But there's two reasons why I don't want to get into that today. One is I'm burnt out on it, because if you turn on cable news or any news, that is what is dominating everything. And when a story just dominates everything to the extent that this is, I get a little burnt out on it, and I need a break from it. I actually put myself for the second time in probably the last month, over the last weekend, I put myself into a sort of a self-imposed news blackout where I didn't pay attention to any news. which is hard for me being a political junkie. But the thing is, when I turn on one of the cable news networks and nobody's talking about politics, they're all talking about Ferguson. It's Ferguson all the time. It's like, okay, enough. Not that it's not important. It is important. And I did, and this is the other reason why I'm not going to get into it today. Last Thursday on the radio edition of Matt Connarton Unleashed, which is, of course, Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern Time at dkrn.fm. You can stream it on your mobile device, dkrn.fm/mobile. And by the way, that's mobile as in mobile, like with the E on the end. If you leave the E off, it's, just mobile as in like the gas station. That doesn't get you anything. Mobile. I did devote the entire hour to what's going on in Ferguson. So, and I may talk about it again tomorrow night. We'll see. But again, I spent the whole hour on it last Thursday. So we'll go on to some other stuff. There's some other really important political stories that are really kind of being not buried, but one of them I think is kind of being buried in all the talk about Ferguson. And I love a good political scandal, as you all know. It's kind of a love-hate thing. I love it in that I find it all very entertaining, political scandals. It's also a hate thing in that it frustrates me that we don't, as voters, use the power that we have to tear down this whole corrupt two-party system and begin electing independents whom we might actually hold responsible and accountable for something. But instead, when a political scandal happens, because of two-party ideology, if a political scandal happens to a Republican, Republicans will rally around that individual and Democrats will rally against that individual. And same thing in the inverse, of course. If it's a Democrat who has fallen into political scandal, other Democrats will rally around that person and you'll have Republicans trying to pick him or her off and get them, like we see with Obama and Boehner talking about suing the president and all that. So I want to get into some scandal. There are one of these stories has been developing over the past 6 weeks or so, and I haven't really gotten into it, but I'm going to get into it today. There's 3 governors who are in trouble right now, and I want to explore all 3, 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat. Fascinating stuff. But first, a couple things I want to touch on quickly. Longtime viewers of the show know that I do also like to develop a fair amount of time on this program ridiculing John Boehner, House Speaker John Boehner, who I think is really just a buffoon and sort of is in some way somewhat of a contributing factor to this sort of banana republic style government that we have. Boehner, who I think has just been so, let me put it this way. He can't control his own caucus, his own party in the House, and that's part of what a House Speaker is responsible for. If you're the Republican leader in the House, and, this is why he always had Eric Cantor looking over his shoulder, former Majority Leader Eric Cantor, who had to, who lost his primary, got primaried out. He just looks like a buffoon to me. He can't stand up to the Tea Party wing of his own party, who are far-right extremists and who don't understand, in my view, pragmatism. For example, you've heard me talk about the debt ceiling, why it's important that when it's time to raise the debt ceiling or the debt limit, we have to do that. We have to. And I think a lot of the conservative Tea Party types, I don't want to say conservatives, but Tea Partiers specifically, literally don't understand what the debt limit is, and that's why they oppose raising it. And Boehner now really looks ridiculous because he's talking about, for the first time in the history of the country, the executive branch actually suing, the legislative branch, rather, actually suing the executive branch of our government over an executive order issued by Obama delaying a specific part of a specific law that they're claiming he doesn't have the authority to delay, even though it's a specific part of a specific law that the Republicans hate to begin with. And even though there's plenty of precedent for this particular executive order, for example, George W. Bush did the same thing with Medicare Part D. He issued executive orders delaying specific parts of that. No one said, "Oh, this is an abuse of power" and all this ridiculous stuff. And but Boehner is suing. They're going forward with it. They're actually suing the president over an executive order doing something that they should, in theory, actually be happy about. So they look ridiculous because of that. And they look even more ridiculous because there's certain Republicans who keep talking about impeaching Obama. We need to go for impeachment, which looks particularly funny, seeing as how we just passed the 40th anniversary of Richard M. Nixon resigning from office because he himself was staring in the face of impeachment over Watergate. And these lunatics are talking about impeaching Obama over an executive order. Again, an executive order that in theory they should be happy about. And it's clear, it's obvious, the only reason Boehner is doing this whole lawsuit BS is to placate the Tea Partiers. He doesn't want to go all in with them and say, sure, we'll move ahead with impeachment, because he knows that's going to further damage the Republican Party, because he's not stupid. He's spineless. He's a buffoon, but he's not a complete idiot. He knows how damaging it will be to the Republicans in 2016 if they completely go over the edge and say, let's try to impeach Obama. So this is kind of the compromise to placate the Tea Partiers. Well, look, I'm doing something. I'm John Boehner. I'm doing something. We'll sue the president. Crazy stuff. But he can't control these people. And then I saw this. David Lauder writes this for Reuters. This popped up today. John Boehner's troubles with House conservatives may only get worse. So this is from Wisconsin, Dateline, Wisconsin. David Lauder writes, Glenn Grothman is a fiery conservative who wants to slash welfare programs and crack down on illegal immigrants who he says will destroy America. Ooh, this sounds like a serious man. And if U.S. House Speaker John Boehner wants to keep his job next year, he had better be sure Grothman and his fellow House of Representatives newcomers are happy. Grothman, see, because that's the thing. Boehner's job, apparently, as House Speaker, is not to lead. He's certainly no leader. It's not to fulfill his duties as House Speaker. It's to keep these crazy, the lunatic fringe of his own party from completely ruining the party. Because establishment mainstream conservatives are terrified of these people, and they should be. Look what happened to Eric Cantor. Grothman, the expected winner in a tight Republican primary for the right to succeed 73-year-old Representative Thomas Petrie in Wisconsin, is one of more than a dozen vocal conservatives, in other words, Tea Partiers, gunning to replace more moderate or pragmatic retiring House Republicans in November's midterm elections. Their arrival could mean even more headaches for Boehner, who has struggled in recent years, to put it mildly, to keep his fractious caucus together on critical battles over tax and spending bills, and most recently on legislation to secure border funding. What a mess that debacle is. A further shift to the right in the House, continuing a trend that began with the Tea Party surge in 2010, could signal another round of high-stakes political showdowns early in the new year and ultimately threaten Boehner's leadership. One of the first votes of the new House Conservatives, one of the first votes that the new House Conservatives will face in March, here we go, will be on raising the federal debt limit, a topic that already has produced two grinding partisan battles that rattled financial markets and threatened U.S. credit ratings. Okay, let me stop for a moment. I know longtime viewers have heard this 1,000 times, but if you're new, here's the thing about the federal debt limit. A lot of people who I think a lot of people who oppose raising the debt limit literally don't understand what it is. And that is why they can't fully comprehend the consequences of not raising it because they literally just don't understand what it is, which is terrifying to think that there are people that we actually elect in this country to go and represent us in DC who in theory should have our best interests at heart, which they really don't. It's whoever bought and paid for their campaigns who they really work for. But they also have the power, these same people have the power to destroy the country with their ignorance. So if you're new, or if you're one of the slow kids, here's what the debt limit is. The debt limit is the amount of money that the United States can borrow to pay off existing debt. Okay? Think of it this way. If you have a credit card, and let's say you need to, your credit card's about maxed out, but you have an unexpected expense or something. So you need to raise your credit limit. Because if you don't pay for this unexpected expense, you're kind of screwed, right? So you call the credit card company and ask them to raise your credit limit, okay? That's what we do whenever it's time to raise the debt limit. It is raising the amount of money that the United States can borrow to pay for existing debt. Here's what I think these people don't understand. They don't understand that it's not the same thing as saying, let's increase the federal budget. I think these people are literally so ignorant that they don't understand the difference between these two things. The federal budget is how much money the federal government is going to spend. That's how much money they've committed to spending. When you're talking about the debt limit, you're talking about paying for debt that is already, for money that has already been spent. If you don't raise the debt limit, we default. The United States government, for the first time in the history of the country, defaults on the full faith and credit of our debt. Default. It would be no different than to oppose raising the debt limit. It would be like if you say, again, that credit card, that hypothetical credit card, you can't say with your credit card, if you spent, let's say you had a month where maybe you got a little reckless, maybe you were a little irresponsible, as our federal government is with your money, and you spent too much. You spent too much on that credit card. When that bill comes, you can't just look at that bill and say, you know what? We spent too much money, so we're just not going to pay this bill. We're just going to stop paying our credit cards. What would happen if you did that? You would be defaulting on your credit cards, right? You would be defaulting on that debt, money that you have already agreed, debt that you've already agreed to pay off. You would default. And then what happens to your credit rating? It goes into the toilet. Well, what happens to you financially? Now you've got bigger problems. You should have said, okay, well, we spent too much, but we're going to grin and bear it and pay this. That's what you got to do. You don't just say, screw it, we spent too much. We need to learn to be more fiscally responsible, so we'll just default on everything. Next thing you know, you're going to be having to file for bankruptcy. It's the same thing. When these people say, no, we can't raise the debt limit, I think they conflate that with the actual budget itself. So they think they're actually being responsible by saying, no, we're not going to vote the debt limit. But here's the biggest problem with this. If we default, any economist will tell you that it is critical that we not default, because default would be global economic Armageddon if this country actually defaulted on our debt. And any economist will tell you this. Not just, some liberal Keynesian-style, reckless economists who think it's okay for the government to rack up as much debt as it wants to and it doesn't matter. No, even conservative-minded so-called supply-side economists will tell you the same thing. Any economist will tell you default is not an option. Any economist, I challenge you, ask any economist, they will tell you default is not an option, because if we actually default, it will ruin the global economy. It is global economic Armageddon. And that is what makes these people so dangerous. And that is why the Tea Partiers must be stopped. There's a variety of other issues where I think they're completely off the rails, but this is the big one. If we actually did what they think we should do, it would make the Great Depression look like the Roaring '20s. This economy would fall off a cliff from which we would not recover in our lifetimes. I don't personally want to live in a Hooverville and stand in a bread line. I don't know about you. So I'm sorry if you're not happy that we spend too much money. But to say we're going to default on what we've already committed to spending is just plain stupid. And some of these people are just literally too stupid to trust with this responsibility. And that's why these people must be stopped. And so, I'm already dreading what's going to happen next March when we have to have another fight over the debt limit. The debt limit used to be a routine thing. You raise it because it's common sense. You have to raise it. If you think we spend too much money, that's something you fight. You fight that battle over the budget. You don't fight it over the debt limit. Reagan knew that. Ronald Wilson Reagan, everyone's big conservative hero. Republicans, Reagan is Christ as far as they're concerned. Reagan used to say to not raise the debt limit would be reckless and irresponsible. So if you doubt that what I'm telling you is true, just go back and look at what your conservative, never wrong about anything hero Ronald Wilson Reagan used to say about raising the debt limit. When in doubt, go to Reagan. That's what I say to my conservative friends. All right, we'll finish this up. I digressed, as I often do. And sometimes my digression veers off into editorializing. With Republicans now holding 234 House seats, it takes only 17 Republican no votes to sink legislation without Democratic support, giving the growing conservative bloc immense clout in legislative negotiations. James Thurber, a political scientist at American University, referring to the majority needed to pass legislation in the House, said, quote, "It's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, for the next speaker to get to 218 votes without some Democrats. But turning to Democrats more often to pass critical budget, transportation, or immigration bills next year is a path toward political potential mutiny by conservatives," said Thurber. He also said, quote, "There's just nobody in the middle anymore and nobody that's willing to cross parties to vote because of this polarization," unquote. And that's another reason why I feel so strongly that the two-party system is destroying America, because Democrats and Republicans both, they treat it like a team sport. There's no middle anymore. There's no room for compromise on anything ever. It's a team sport. It's us against them, blue versus red. Can't let the other guys score any points on us. Can't be seen compromising on anything, because then somebody might score some points and get a few over on us. That's how they treat it. Let's see. Boehner could face a challenge to his speaker position when House members choose their leadership after the November elections. Boehner said this summer that he was all in to seek another term as speaker, apparently quashing speculation that he has grown weary of the job. He looks weary of the job. He looked weary of the job 10 days into it. It's been a rocky 4 years since Boehner took up his gavel in 2011. To remain speaker, Boehner has had to give in to caucus demands and find ways to pass more conservative legislation, even if it had little chance of passing the Democratic-controlled Senate. After passing a tax increase on the wealthy and $5.7 billion in aid for Superstorm Sandy legislation, largely with Democratic votes last year, he won back support by agreeing to the Tea Party effort to withhold funding from Obama's health care law. The move led to a 16-day federal government shutdown, but Boehner won points for listening to the conservative sentiment of his caucus. There's a lot more to this, but we're going to move on from this. That kind of gets it out. If you want to read the whole article, again, it's titled "John Boehner's Troubles with House Conservatives May Only Get Worse." The author is David Lauder, and you can find that at Reuters, Reuters.com. The other quick thing, a couple months ago, I was all excited about what's been going on in Mississippi with the Thad Cochran, conservative Republican Thad Cochran mobilizing the African-American vote to actually vote for him in an open primary. I'm sorry, actually in a runoff technically, but they have open primaries where regardless of party affiliation, you can vote in either primary. And of course, Chris McDaniel, the Tea Party challenger, was very upset by this and cried foul. I just think this is kind of funny. This is, and then we'll move on to the governor stuff in a second, but this is from the 12th, so this is from about a week ago. This is also from Reuters. Emily Lacose writes, Chris McDaniel lists his own lawyer's vote as tainted. See, Chris McDaniel is challenging the validity of the votes that were cast in that election. Apparently his own lawyer's vote was one of them that is being questioned. The Tea Party-backed U.S. Senate candidate in Mississippi challenging his loss in the June Republican primary has moved to have his own lawyer's vote in the election stricken on the grounds that it was tainted by a poll worker. Chris McDaniel, the challenger, lost in a runoff to incumbent Thad Cochran by some 7,700 votes, but said in a challenge filed last week that thousands of irregular or illegal votes were cast and that the result should be overturned. The state Republican Party declined to hear the case, leaving him the option of taking the matter to court. McDaniel attorney Mitch Tyner's name appeared on a list of irregular votes filed as an addendum to the complaint. Also listed was his wife, Sloan Tyner. The pair voted in the Jackson suburb of Madison, where McDaniel's camp maintains their improper writing in the poll book, in which voter records are kept, effectively invalidated dozens of votes. McDaniel campaign spokesman Noel Fritch, who added that he personally reviewed the book in question, said, quote, "We turned every single page, and every single page had lines through it, lines crossed through names, had words written outside the columns," unquote. McDaniel said some 15,000 ballots were illegally or improperly cast in the runoff, many of them by people ineligible by virtue of having voted in the June 3rd Democratic primary. And by the way, that is that part of his claim could be legitimate. The way the rules work in Mississippi, if you already voted in the primary for a person of a particular party affiliation, you can't then vote for the other party in the runoff. So in other words, if you voted for a Democrat in the original primary, if you voted in the Democratic primary, you can't then go and vote again in the Republican runoff. That is not allowed. Jordan Russell, spokesman for the Cochran campaign, said the inclusion of McDaniel's lawyer on the candidate's list of invalid voters underlines the flimsy nature of the challenge. He said, quote, "This is the perfect example of the lack of seriousness in this challenge, which is clearly just a political stunt," unquote. Tyner did not immediately return messages seeking comment. So I just thought that was funny. Chris McDaniel, he's still hanging on. He still refuses to concede in Mississippi to Thad Cochran, but it's definitely a losing battle. All right. We've got 3 governors in trouble in this country right now. Now, some of you may know this, some of you may not, because again, this is being lost. Some of this is being lost in all the news about Ferguson, what's going on in Ferguson, Missouri. But this is fascinating. We've got 3 governors in trouble, and there are some common threads here. And, you know, governors in trouble, ethically, legally, it's not a new thing. It's not a new thing in American politics. My personal favorite of all time, of course, is Rod Blagojevich, former Democratic governor of Illinois, who is now in prison. I believe he's still in prison. I think he went away for a long time. I always loved his hair. If you don't remember, if you can figure out how to spell Blagojevich, go on YouTube and go to Google Images. I mean, sorry, not YouTube. Go to Google. Just go to Google Images and look up Rod Blagojevich. He just by virtue of his hairstyle, he looks like a villain in a 70s cop show. Amazing, amazing hair on that man. So the 3 governors in question are, of course, Chris Christie in New Jersey. More recently, Andrew Cuomo, Democratic governor of New York. And now we have, of course, Republican governor, Mr. Oops himself, Rick Perry, in Texas. They are all in trouble and all for legal and ethical reasons. And now, of course, the Chris Christie story is nothing new, but there is a thread between Chris Christie and Andrew Cuomo. They are governors, obviously, of neighboring states, New Jersey and New York, respectively. And they're of opposing parties, and yet they seem to be birds of a feather in some ways. Albany, New York, just like New Jersey, is not known for being a particularly ethical place. Definitely, both New York and New Jersey are known for a lot of dirty, sleazy politics and have had their share of political scandal. Chris Christie, of course, was expected to be and may yet be a Republican candidate for the nomination in 2016. And Andrew Cuomo, while he never had the energy and the passion behind him to propel him to the nomination for the Democratic Party in 2016, there was some talk. I think on the Democratic side, a lot of people, including, by the way, our current sitting Vice President Joe Biden, are kind of sitting back and waiting to see what happens in terms of Hillary, what she decides to do. Speaking of which, I had lunch with my dad the other day, and he brought up something I hadn't thought of. Where is Joe Biden? Joe Biden seems to have disappeared. Why is that? He's always been very active, very visible vice president. All of a sudden, maybe he's having more hair plugs put in. I don't know. Where did Joe Biden go? Where in the world is Joe Biden? I miss him. So they are known for being tight, these two governors. Again, not just because they're of neighboring states, but Chris Christie and Andrew Cuomo. They're I don't know if they're friends necessarily, but they've always had apparently a very good relationship. But again, birds of a feather, because we're seeing some scandal. The Chris Christie scandal, of course, began with Bridgegate, and then there's all these little ancillary scandals which seem to have really damaged him in New Jersey, although strangely enough in national polls he hasn't suffered, which is troubling to me, because if he's got all this scandal around him and he's not taking a hit for it in national polling, then that indicates to me that there's a lack of a willingness among people to hold him accountable. There are things about the guy that I like. I will admit it, but I certainly at this point would never support him for any public office. I wouldn't trust him to walk my dog. I don't even have a dog, so that shows you how little I do trust him. But this is funny. Okay, so Chris Christie, one of the knocks, putting the scandal part of it aside for a moment, one of the knocks against him by members of his own party has been he's a little too willing to compromise and sort of cozy up to Democrats in their view. For example, he always had a very good relationship with Cory Booker, who's now a U.S. Senator, when Cory Booker was mayor of Newark, New Jersey, a Democrat. And he has other Democratic allies. One of the reasons that Chris Christie has been so successful in New Jersey is his ability to reach across the aisle and work with Democrats and to compromise on some things, because New Jersey, obviously, a northeastern state, a very blue state, a very liberal state, and yet they've had, again, putting aside all the scandal, they've had a very successful Republican governor. Chris Christie really upset some Republican establishmentarians, however, recently. This was last month when he refused, and by the way, this was before the Andrew Cuomo scandal broke. Chris Christie refused to campaign for Rob Astorino, the Republican candidate for governor of New York, challenging Andrew Cuomo. And people of the RGA, the Republican Governors Association, got very angry with Chris Christie. This whole dynamic is fascinating, because here you have Chris Christie. They made him head of the chairman, I think officially is the term, chairman of the RGA, the Republican Governors Association, because at the time they thought he's potentially the next Republican nominee for president. At the very least, he's very much a rising star, a rapidly rising star in the Republican Party, with a tremendous national profile, very high approval ratings, likability ratings, So they made him head of the RGA. Then the scandals break. We got Bridgegate. We got all these other little scandals around that, around some of the federal funding in the wake of Hurricane Sandy that apparently there were some, I mean, that's a whole other thing we don't have time to get into, but a lot of scandals swirling around this guy. And they can't figure out, though, at the RGA, his fellow Republican governors, how to get him out of there. They can't talk him into stepping down. I guarantee you there's been closed-door meetings about that, about, Governor, maybe you should kind of step away from this for the moment. He's the kind of guy who's never going to step down, just like he'll never resign, no matter how much scandal swirls around him, because he's stubborn. And I guarantee you he sees, and his advisors see, that if he were to step down, I don't mean just resigning his governorship, forget that, that'll never happen, but even if he resigned as chairman of the RGA and they bestowed that honor upon someone else, he would view that as an admission of guilt, and he has been steadfast that he did nothing wrong. So then that creates this situation where, let's bring Rick Perry into the conversation. So a few months ago, Chris Christie goes to Texas to campaign for Republicans in Texas because part of his role as chairman of the RGA is fundraising. You gotta raise money, and he's good at fundraising anyway. But as head of the RGA, look, that's part of the gig. Just like if you're head of the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, that's part of the gig. You got to go raise money for Democrats. That's how this stuff works. He goes to Texas. And Rick Perry, all of a sudden, isn't around, doesn't want to be seen with the guy. Texas Republican Governor Rick Perry, okay, Chris, thanks for coming. I think I'm busy that day. So you've got this governor, and the whole point of him being in the position he's in is to raise money, and other Republicans don't want to be seen within 10 feet of him because he's got all this scandal around him. But he's going around doing his thing, traveling around the states to raise money. Just nobody wants to be seen with him, including Rick Perry. All right, so now we've got all three of them in the conversation, right? All three. We've got Christie, Cuomo, and Perry. So, and we'll come back to Perry in a minute. But, okay, so they don't want to be seen with him, but then when they do need him, he doesn't want to play ball. He's, all of a sudden Chris Christie's like a cop, right? When you don't want him around, he shows up. But when you do want him around, he doesn't want to show up. They can't get Chris Christie to campaign for Rob Astorino against his buddy Andrew Cuomo, even though Andrew Cuomo is from the opposing party. Chris Christie says, no, I'm not going to do it. Listen to this. So this is the AP article from July 22nd. New York Republican gubernatorial candidate Rob Astorino on Tuesday suggested that the head of the RGA, Chris Christie, should step down from his post at the group if he is unwilling to campaign for the defeat of New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. Astorino said in a news conference in Manhattan, quote, if Governor Christie is unable to help a Republican candidate for governor, then maybe he should consider stepping down as chairman of the RGA, unquote. Mr. Astorino's comments came in response to Christie's suggestion on Monday that he wouldn't assist Mr. Astorino due to the lopsided nature of the New York gubernatorial race. Christie said while campaigning as chairman of the RGA in Connecticut, quote, we don't pay for landslides and we don't invest in lost causes, unquote. Now that's interesting because you can look at that. There's a couple of ways to spin that. Maybe he's being sincere. Maybe this has nothing to do with the fact that he's tight with Andrew Cuomo. Or maybe, who knows, maybe they're keeping some of each other's secrets. I don't know. That's just speculation. Or it could be legit that he really does look at it like Astorino's a lost cause, because Andrew Cuomo is so immensely popular. The Cuomo name is immensely popular in New York State. I remember back in 92 when Andrew Cuomo's dad, Mario Cuomo, was governor of New York, and there was all this pressure on him to get in to the race for the nomination, for the Democratic nomination for president, because it was looking like it was going to be Slick Willie, and people were dissatisfied with that. And Cuomo was so popular, there was all this pressure on him to get in, and he wouldn't get in. He said, no, I'm not going to do it. So we ended up with Clinton. for better or worse, depending on your point of view. But so Christie's saying, this is a lost cause. There's no way this guy can beat Cuomo, so we're not going to worry about it. In the most recent poll published on Monday by Siena College, Mr. Cuomo holds a 37% lead over Mr. Astorino. Again, this is pre-scandal. The Westchester County executive. And Mr. Cuomo wields a financial advantage as well, with $35 million in his campaign account versus Mr. Astorino's $2.4 million. By the way, that doesn't always matter. I mean, probably 99.9% of the time it does. But look what happened to Eric Cantor, who outspent exponentially his challenger, Tea Partier David Bratt, and Bratt ended up winning and primaried him successfully, primaried Cantor out of office. Christie said, quote, if the New York race becomes competitive, I'll consider campaigning in the New York race. But right now, by the public polls, there's a lot more competitive races like the one in Connecticut. Mr. Astorino, however, likely didn't improve his chances by enjoying the support of the RGA or Mr. Christie by referencing the scandal over the lane closures of the George Washington Bridge, a flap that has embroiled the Christie administration for months. All right, there's more to this, but that gets it out. So basically, Astorino and other Republicans are mad at Christie for not campaigning for the Republican candidate for governor in New York to challenge Andrew Cuomo. Then this happens. Andrew Cuomo gets himself into some trouble. This is... I'm sorry. This did start to unfold prior to Christie's refusal to campaign against Cuomo, which actually makes the story a little more interesting. So this is from April. Cuomo on Moreland tampering. It's my commission. Okay, because we're running out of time. Let me summarize this for you. Andrew Cuomo, when he ran for governor of New York, said, we're going to have what's called a Moreland Commission, which will investigate political corruption in our state government. Because like I said, Albany, the capital of New York, is also known for, like New Jersey, for being rife with corruption. So Andrew Cuomo says, vote for me, and I'm going to make sure we deal with this. And this Moreland Commission would have the authority legislatively to investigate anybody, including his own office, including him. He said that this commission will have the authority to investigate anybody. No one will be exempt. Anywhere where they see the potential for corruption, the smell of anything untoward, they can investigate. They will have full authority and will be unfettered. He went out of his way to say that. He made it a campaign issue. Okay, this wasn't just something that he said in passing on a radio interview with some NPR affiliate. This was a campaign issue. He went out of his way to make this point. I will tamp down on this corruption with this commission. He then appoints the commission. The commission begins to investigate things connected. Once he's in office, the commission begins to investigate things connected directly to the governor's office. And what does Andrew Cuomo do? It's something so brazen and blatant and obvious and just kind of like, wow, really? To me, it's on the same scale of arrogance as, again, we just had the 40th anniversary of Nixon's resignation. It's like Watergate, the Saturday Night Massacre, when Nixon fired Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox on a Saturday night, hoping the media wouldn't notice because Cox was investigating Nixon. So Nixon just said, you're fired. Andrew Cuomo, as soon as they start investigating things connected to him, he disbands the commission. He just says, that's it. You guys are done. Let me read a little bit of this. Well, okay. I'm gonna skip ahead because we're running out of time, and I want to get to Rick Perry. So, all right, I'll read this part of this quickly. So, Andrew Cuomo says that any possible interference by his administration into the operations of the recently disbanded Moreland Commission would not be subject to investigation. In an interview Wednesday with the Crain's editorial board, Cuomo responded to recent comments by Southern District U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara that he would, quote, take very, very seriously any suggestion, unquote, that Mr. Cuomo's office interfered with the Moreland Commission, which Mr. Cuomo impaneled in 2013. 2013! This commission hasn't even been around that long, and he's already dismantled it, which he impaneled in 2013 to investigate corruption in the state legislature. Mr. Bharara declined to rule out investigating whether Mr. Cuomo's office had sought to influence the commission. But Mr. Cuomo told Crain's that because, listen to this, the arrogance is incredible. He told Crain's, which is the local publication there in Albany, he told Crain's that because he formed the Moreland Commission himself, his administration would have the legal leeway to be involved in its affairs. He said, quote, it's not a legal question. The Moreland Commission was my commission. It's my commission, my subpoena power, my Moreland Commission. I can appoint it. I can disband it. I appoint you. I can unappoint you tomorrow. So interference, it's my commission. I can't interfere with it because it's mine. It's controlled by me, unquote. That was him speaking verbatim. Did you count the my's and me's and I's in that? I mean, the guy comes off like a raving narcissist. And it's all, well, it doesn't matter why the commission was created or whatever. It's my commission. I can do with it whatever I want. It's the height of arrogance. This guy's incredible. It's mine. I can disband it if I want to. Whatever. Why are you asking me these questions? It's mine, 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 mine. I mean, he just comes across like a lunatic. Unbelievable. I'm just kind of skipping ahead here in the article to see if there's anything else in here worth, let's see. Here's another quote from him. He says, there's no rationale to keep the investigations committee because I didn't pass the public finance bill. Why didn't I say I'll keep Moreland unless you pass abortion protections? I'll keep Moreland unless you pass the DREAM Act. That's extortive to say I'm going to investigate you unless you pass a piece of legislation I want you to pass. So he's one of the accusations that he's facing basically is that he was using he disbanded the Moreland Commission as in a way to extort something out of his political adversaries to try to get his way. Well, if you don't give me my way, I'm going to dismantle this commission that, by the way, happens to be investigating me. By the way, he also claims, and we don't have time to get to all of this, but he has been claiming that. Well, here we go. This is from July 28th. This is recent. This is from the Buffalo News. Governor Cuomo today labeled his Moreland Commission to investigate public corruption. That's the full title. An overwhelming success, citing its independence and relying on a new statement of support from the panel's co-chairman to counter any claims of political interference from his office. Oh, we can go ahead and get rid of it. It was a success, and it was independent, and now they're all done. No more corruption to investigate. It was a success, and we can just get rid of that now. Nothing to see here. Everything's taken care of. Trust me. I'm Andrew Cuomo. Just unbelievable. The arrogance. I'm looking for any other great Andrew Cuomo quotes here. It doesn't matter. And one other thing. Apparently, this is from the Albany Times-Union. New York Governor Andrew M. Cuomo's administration, which the governor pledged would be the most transparent in state history. I love whenever anyone says this is going to be transparent. I've just learned there's been recent examples, by the way, with the Obama administration. Transparency it's just a word to these people. It doesn't actually mean anything. It's a political buzzword. would be the most transparent in state history, has quietly adopted policies that allow it to purge the emails of tens of thousands of state employees, cutting off a key avenue for understanding and investigating state government. Last year, the state started deleting any emails more than 90 days old that users hadn't specifically saved. A much more aggressive stance than many other states. The policy shift was first reported by the Albany Times-Union. Benjamin Wright, a Dallas lawyer who has advised companies and government agencies on records retention, says, quote, "If you're aggressively destroying your email, it looks like you're trying to hide something," unquote. You think? All right. Well, we're about out of time. So our third character in this wonderful play, we'll discuss more tomorrow night on the radio edition of Unleashed. Of course, Governor Oops, Rick Perry, from the great state of Texas. He's in some trouble himself. We did introduce Rick Perry a little earlier into the story. He will make a return appearance in our what should we call this little story? We need a name for it. A Tale of Three Governors? I don't know. That's lame. I'll come up with something. He will make a return appearance on the next installment of our story, as yet to be named. If anyone has a name for it, hit me up on Facebook or Twitter or something. We can name our little story of our embattled governors. Maybe that's it. Story of our embattled governors. No, that sucks. I'm not good at naming things. It's probably why the show is called Matt Connarton Unleashed. I don't even like that name. I'm just kidding. So that will do it. So join me tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Eastern Time at dkrn.fm for the radio edition of Unleashed, where we will continue our story. And also, too, by the way, don't forget, later on Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades, Gary and I will be talking with George Lambert, who is running for the state Senate here in New Hampshire. And like I said at the top of the show, even if you're only interested more in national politics, I do believe that what is going on in the Republican Party in New Hampshire, and George is certainly a Republican, and Gary as well, of course. I do believe that that is a microcosm of what is happening in the Republican Party nationally in terms of the tug and pull between the different factions of the Republican Party. So I think it will be a very interesting discussion, as it was the last time that George was on Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. So join us for that. That is it for now, and I will talk at y'all a little bit later. Thanks, everybody.